The sun hung high in the sky over the distant planet, a small world untouched by the vast conflicts and advanced technology of the galaxy's older civilizations. It was a world known to the aliens as Deathworld, home to a species that, from a distance, seemed far beneath the aliens' lofty standards. The alien ship descended silently through the atmosphere, its metallic surface reflecting the light from the twin suns. Inside, the elite warriors of the Zorath, a proud and ancient alien species prepared for what they believed would be a routine mission. They had traveled across many star systems, encountering countless species, all of whom had surrendered to their superior technology. Humans, the inhabitants of this death world, were nothing more than a curiosity to them. The Zorath had heard whispers of their unpredictable nature and basic technologies, but to them, these were just primitive creatures, weaklings who had not yet ascended to the level of their own civilization. They believed that these humans would not last long in the greater galactic order, and their mission was to assess this world and its inhabitants. The ship touched down softly in a clearing near a small human settlement. The Zorath warriors filed out, towering and powerful, each adorned in sleek armored suits designed for strength, speed, and precision. They had faced threats from beings far more dangerous than anything this world could offer, but they were not prepared for what they would soon witness. The humans had no such advanced armor, no impenetrable shields or sophisticated weaponry. Instead, the people of the settlement wore simple, rugged clothing, and their daily life seemed mundane. The warriors watched from a distance as humans moved through their daily tasks, working, laughing, talking, and training. At first, the Zorath were unimpressed. They expected the humans to cower in fear, to bow before their superior power. But then something caught their attention. A group of humans were running through a field dressed in simple clothes and carrying heavy sacks filled with supplies. The Zorath warriors, accustomed to high-tech combat gear, couldn't help but stare in confusion. The humans were running with an unearthly speed, covering vast distances without any apparent struggle. Their faces were determined, focused, and without the aid of any advanced technology. "What is this?" The Zorath commander Korath asked, his voice low and rumbling. One of his subordinates, a younger warrior named Jean, glanced at him. "They're running, as if it's nothing." Korath's gaze fixed on the humans. "But these are nothing more than creatures. Their bodies are weak. They should tire. They should fall." But the humans didn't. They didn't slow down. In fact, they sped up, showing no signs of fatigue despite the heavy loads they carried. The Zorath warriors, who were used to advanced technologies and physical perfection, were puzzled. How could these weaklings do such things? The aliens had seen many species, but never anything like this. As the humans finished their run, they slowed to a stop, laughing and cheering. One of them, a young man, dropped his sack of supplies and stood tall, panting but smiling. The Zorath warriors could see his muscles flex beneath his clothes, his posture strong and defiant. He was no alien, no perfect creature of war. Yet there was something in the way he carried himself that made the Zorath pause. "This is what they call basic," Jean said, still struggling to understand. Korath watched, his mind racing. There was something unnerving about this. These humans were not as weak as they had assumed. They didn't just survive on their hostile planet, they thrived in it. In the distance, another group of humans gathered around a fire. They were talking, exchanging stories, and sharing food. Some of them were laughing, others listening intently. It wasn't what the Zorath had expected. There were no sophisticated weapons, no high-tech tools. Just simple, rugged beings surviving with what they had, using their wits, their bodies, and the world around them. "What is their secret?" Korath muttered to himself. "How do they endure?" His question was met with silence. The Zorath had always assumed that the key to survival was power. Power through technology, power through strength, power through knowledge. But this human world, so simple and raw, was challenging that belief. Korath had no answers, only growing curiosity. "Commander," Jean spoke again, "they have no shields, no weapons, Only their bodies and their minds. Korath turned to face him, his eyes narrowing. And it is enough. This is a death world, isn't it? These creatures live here without the protection of advanced technology. They survive. They endure. The words hung in the air as Korath processed the implications. What if these humans weren't just simple, primitive creatures? What if they were something more? The Zorath commander was not one to back down from a challenge, and something inside him stirred. A realization that this mission, which he had thought would be routine, was about to become much more complicated than he had anticipated. He looked toward the humans, still unaware of the watching eyes from above. This world, Korath said, his voice steady, may be more than we imagined. And with that, the alien warriors stood paralyzed, watching as the Deathworlders went about their simple lives, still unaware that their existence had just been noticed by some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the human settlement. The Zorath warriors, still standing in the distance, watched with growing interest as the humans went about their daily routines. But today, something different was about to happen. Korath, the Zorath commander, stood with his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. He had been observing the humans for several hours now, but they still baffled him. He had expected their lives to be full of weakness, full of struggle, unlike the advanced technology and power of his own species. But the longer he watched, the more he realized that this world, this death world, held secrets he hadn't yet begun to understand. It's like they don't know their limits, Jean, the young warrior said, shaking his head in disbelief. Korath's gaze shifted from the humans to Jean. Limits? These creatures have no limits. They endure. They survive. It's unsettling. Jean nodded, looking at a group of humans preparing for what appeared to be a trial of some sort. They had gathered in an open field, some stretching their limbs while others tied ropes around their waists. The alien warriors could see that the humans were preparing for something physical, something the Zorath had not expected. Korath stepped forward, his curiosity growing. What are they doing? Jean stepped closer to him. I believe they're preparing for a challenge, a trial of endurance perhaps. The humans began moving in unison, their actions precise, their focus sharp. They were not equipped with advanced tools or weapons. They relied only on their bodies, their strength, and their wits. The Zorath watched in silence, each warrior absorbed in the spectacle before them. One of the humans, a tall, muscular figure, stepped to the front of the group. His face was set with determination as he looked over the course ahead of him. It was a series of obstacles, mud pits, walls to climb, and ropes to swing across. A challenge meant to test endurance, strength, and speed. Korath leaned forward. What are they trying to prove? Jean watched as the human took his first step into the course. They do not need to prove anything. They do this for the sake of challenge, to push their limits even if they don't know what their limits are. The human soldier sprinted across the field, his body moving with speed and grace. He was fast, faster than Korath had expected. The Zorath warriors, who were used to the precision of their own training, found themselves unable to look away as the human dodged the obstacles with ease. Impressive, Jean murmured, his eyes following the human's every move. But it wasn't just his speed that amazed them. It was the way the human handled every obstacle. The mud pit came first. It was deep and sticky, making it nearly impossible to move quickly, but the human didn't hesitate. He plunged right in, his arms pushing through the thick, clinging mud, his legs moving with determination. Despite the struggle, he powered, through Korath's brow furrowed. This is nothing more than a simple obstacle. But Jean was silent. He was watching something deeper, something that Korath hadn't noticed. The human wasn't just overcoming obstacles. He was doing so with a kind of grit, a determination that was almost animalistic. Do you see? Jean said, his voice soft. They don't quit. They adapt. Their bodies don't slow down. They push beyond what we would consider impossible. The human was now facing a wall. a tall, sheer barrier that most species would have no hope of climbing without the aid of advanced tools. But the soldier didn't hesitate. He leapt toward the wall, his muscles straining as he grabbed hold of the edge. With a powerful heave, he pulled himself up, his legs kicking against the surface as he scaled it with a speed that left the Zorath warriors speechless. "Impossible," Korath muttered, his mouth slightly agape. John nodded. "This is basic to them, this is how they train. This is what they call living." The human soldier reached the top of the wall and jumped down, landing with a roll that absorbed the impact. He was already running toward the next obstacle, a rope swing over a deep ravine. As the human swung across the ravine, the Zorath watched, captivated. It wasn't just the raw power and speed that fascinated them. It was the fact that the human seemed to face every obstacle, every challenge, without hesitation. There was no fear, no self-doubt, just a quiet confidence and a willingness to push through no matter the odds. Korath could feel a strange tension building inside him. He had faced challenges in his life, challenges that tested his strength, his intellect, and his endurance. But this was different. This was something he hadn't prepared for. The human didn't just survive. They seemed to thrive in adversity. "This is no ordinary world," Korath said, his voice low. "These humans are not just strong. They are something more." Jean didn't answer. Instead, his eyes followed the human soldier as he finished the course, his body covered in mud but his expression one of pure satisfaction. The Zorath warriors were speechless. They had seen countless species, each with their own unique abilities, but they had never seen anything quite like this. The human's trial wasn't just about overcoming physical obstacles. It was about pushing beyond the limits of the body and mind. It was about perseverance. And it was that quality that made the Zorath warriors uneasy. As the human wiped the sweat from his brow, smiling with pride at his accomplishment, Korath couldn't shake the feeling that this simple human, with his basic tools and primitive technology, was somehow more dangerous than he had ever imagined. This world, these humans, they are not what we expected, Korath said quietly. He turned to his warriors, his eyes filled with a new understanding. "We must learn more. There is power here, something far beyond what we thought." Jean nodded. "I believe we are just beginning to understand what makes them so different." And as the last rays of sunlight cast a golden glow over the human settlement, the Zorath warriors stood still, each one reflecting on the trial they had just witnessed. The humans were not just survivors. They were a force that could not be easily ignored. The day had turned into evening, the sky painted with shades of orange and pink as the Zorath warriors continued to observe the humans. The air was thick with questions, unanswered and hanging heavy in the atmosphere. Korath, the Zorath commander, stood at the edge of the human settlement, his gaze fixed on the group of humans preparing for something he could not yet understand. The humans had just completed their first set of trials. Their endurance had impressed him, but it wasn't just their physical capabilities that caught his attention. It was their unshakable will. Even when faced with the harshest conditions, they pushed forward, without hesitation. Korath's mind raced, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how dangerous this world truly was. "These creatures," he said softly, almost to himself, "they live like this every day." Jean, standing beside him, didn't answer. Instead, he watched the humans preparing for their next challenge. "I want to test them," Korath said suddenly. "I want to see how far their limits go. They are not as weak as we thought." Jean turned toward him, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" Korath looked over at a human who appeared to be preparing for a different kind of test. He was taller than most, with muscles honed by years of hard labor. The human's expression was one of complete focus, determination in his eyes. It was obvious that he had prepared for this moment for a long time. "Bring him forward," Korath ordered. Jean approached the human, who paused to glance at him before giving a respectful nod. He had no idea the alien warriors were watching, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested he had no fear, no doubts. "What is your name?" Jean asked, his voice firm. The human straightened up. "I'm Jake." Korath stepped forward. Jake, we have seen your trials. You are strong. You move quickly. But now, I want to see how you handle a real test. A challenge not of your own making. Jake raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He was used to challenges. Life on a death world required it. He didn't ask questions. He just took whatever came his way. There is a stretch of land here, Korath continued. Filled with dense jungle and thick undergrowth. The ground is uneven, and the air is heavy with moisture. It is a place of danger where few survive. You will travel across it without any tools, just your body and mind. You will cross it in the shortest time possible. Jake's eyes studied. The alien not out of fear but curiosity. His gaze flickered briefly to the rest of the warriors, who were watching with interest. He could tell that these beings were serious, but so was he. This was nothing compared to the wilds of his home. I'll do it, Jake said simply. There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty. He was ready. Korath stepped back, motioning to John, who signaled the other warriors. A loud horn sounded, marking the start of the challenge. Jake didn't wait. He took off at once, sprinting into the dense jungle with nothing more than the clothes on his back and the raw strength of his body. The Zorath warriors watched in silence as Jake disappeared into the thick trees. Their eyes followed him, fascinated by the speed with which he moved. Jake's body seemed to move with a kind of fluidity, a rhythm that made him appear as if he were one with the jungle. He dodged branches, leapt over rocks, and slid through narrow openings between trees, all without breaking his pace. This is impressive, Jean muttered. How does he move so fast? Korath's eyes never left the human. We've seen warriors before, but none like this. His strength is raw, unrefined, but there's something more. He knows the land. Jake reached a river in the jungle, wide and fast-flowing. Most creatures would have turned back, or at least hesitated. But Jake didn't stop. He ran along the edge, scanning for a way across. A large tree had fallen across the river, creating a natural bridge. It was narrow and unstable, but it was the only way. Without hesitation, Jake ran toward it, his footfall steady. He placed one foot on the trunk, then the other, and began to cross. His body shifted with the movement of the tree, finding balance even as it swayed beneath him. He reached the other side in a matter of seconds, his muscles working in perfect harmony with his instincts. Is he fearless? Jean whispered, almost in awe. Korath said nothing, but his expression shifted. He was beginning to understand something he hadn't before. This human wasn't just a creature surviving. He was living with the land, with its dangers, its challenges, and its unpredictability. As Jake continued his journey, the jungle grew thicker, the air heavier. He climbed steep hills, leapt over ravines, and fought his way through dense undergrowth. Sweat poured from his brow, but there was no sign of slowing down. His mind remained focused on the path ahead, and his body responded without fail. It was as though every muscle, every instinct was tuned to the rhythm of the world around him. Korath watched the human with a sense of admiration. There was a strength in Jake, not just in his muscles, but in his mind. He was a creature of endurance, of pure willpower, the kind of force that couldn't be measured by technology, by gadgets, or by weapons. Jake approached the final stretch, an area where the jungle opened up, but the ground was treacherous. It was a series of uneven cliffs and jagged rocks, leading to a steep drop into a deep ravine. Most would have stopped, turned back, or found another way. But Jake charged ahead, eyes locked on the path. With a burst of speed, he jumped across a gap in the rocks, his arms outstretched for balance. He landed heavily on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact, but he didn't stop. He was close now. Finally, he reached the finish line, a clearing in the jungle where the warriors stood waiting. His breath came in quick, steady bursts, his body covered in dirt and sweat, but there was no sign of exhaustion in his eyes. He had done it. He had completed the challenge in record time. The Zorath warriors stood still, stunned into silence. Korath was the first to move. He stepped forward, his voice low and filled with respect. "You have completed the challenge, human. You have shown us that you are not just strong, but resilient." Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, standing tall in front of the alien commander. "I told you, we survive. We don't stop." Korath looked at him, a new respect in his eyes. "I see that now." And in that moment, the Zorath warriors knew. The humans of this death world were not to be underestimated. They were far more than primitive creatures. They were survivors, and they would never bow to anyone. The Zorath warriors stood at the edge of the human settlement, their eyes focused on Jake as he stood in front of them, breath heavy, but controlled. His challenge had been completed, and the alien warriors had no choice but to admit that they had underestimated him, and all humans. Korath, the Zorath commander, took a long moment to study Jake. The human didn't look like much, no advanced technology, no weapons that could rival the Zoraths, but his strength, endurance, and resolve had proven more than enough. Jake had shown them something they had never expected from a race they thought was primitive. John, the young warrior, spoke first. "Commander, we have seen their strength, their will, but what does this mean? Are they truly a threat?" Korath's gaze never wavered from Jake. "Not just a threat. They are more. These Deathworlders, they survive in a place where the land itself seeks to destroy them, and yet they endure. Their will is something we have not seen before. We must be careful." The Zorath warriors exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced many powerful species, each more technologically advanced than the last, but the humans were different. There was something raw and primal about them, something unpredictable. The Zorath, who had relied on precision and control, now found themselves in a situation they hadn't prepared for. As the sun began to set, casting a red glow across the land, the humans started to gather around a campfire. They seemed relaxed, as if the day's trials had been nothing more than a normal part of life. But Korath knew better now. These trials were not just about physical endurance. They were a reflection of something deeper, something the humans had that the Zorath did not. Jake joined the group around the fire, wiping his brow and taking a deep breath. The other humans clapped him on the back, laughing and exchanging stories. It was clear they had a bond, a connection that was far more powerful than any technology the Zorath possessed. "They are a community," Korath observed, his voice thoughtful. "They do not fight alone. They fight together." Jean nodded. "They are strong as individuals, but they are stronger as a group." Korath's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and that is what makes them dangerous. They are not just survivalists, they are fighters, and they will fight to the end." The commander turned to his warriors. "Tomorrow we will test them further. We will see if they can face what we face. We will see if their strength is truly as great as we have seen." The next day, the Zorath warriors began their training. They had no intention of fighting the humans, not yet, but they wanted to see how the humans would respond to a different kind of challenge. The Zorath set up a mock battle, a test of strategy, strength, and teamwork. They didn't expect the humans to win. The Zorath were trained in combat, their bodies enhanced by technology and years of experience. The humans, with their raw strength and instinct, would be no match for them. Jake and the other humans were gathered in a large open area, the Zorath warriors standing across from them, waiting for the signal to begin. Korath stood at the front, his eyes scanning the humans, studying their every move. He was about to see how they would handle themselves in a fight. The signal was given, and the battle began. At first, the humans hesitated. They weren't used to facing enemies with such advanced combat skills. But then Jake took the lead. Without thinking, he charged forward, using the speed and agility he had shown during his trials. He tackled one of the Zorath warriors, knocking him to the ground. The other humans quickly followed his lead, charging into the fray. The Zorath warriors were taken aback by the humans' bravery. They had expected the humans to falter, to hesitate, to fear. But instead, the humans fought with everything they had. No hesitation, No fear, just a raw, primal desire to survive. Korath's eyes widened as he watched Jake and the others work together, using their surroundings to their advantage. They weren't as skilled as the Zorath, but they didn't need to be. They were relentless, and that relentlessness made them a force to be reckoned with. One of the Zorath warriors, a tall figure named Zarin, tried to strike at Jake with a powerful blow, but Jake was too quick. He ducked, rolled, and came up behind Zarin, knocking him off balance. The Zorath warrior staggered, surprised by the human's quick thinking. "This is impossible," Zarin muttered to himself, watching the humans continue to fight with skill and precision. "How are they doing this?" Korath gritted his teeth. "It's their will. They don't stop, they don't back down. No matter what we throw at them, they fight back." The Zorath warriors had underestimated the humans. They had thought they were just another primitive species, easily defeated by superior technology. But now, they saw the truth. The humans had something the Zorath didn't, a will to survive that couldn't be broken. As the battle raged on, the Zorath began to realize the truth. They could defeat the humans in a fight, but that wasn't the point. The humans didn't fight to win. They fought because they had to. They fought because it was in their nature to survive. Korath signaled to end the battle. The humans were clearly outmatched, but they had held their ground longer than the Zorath had expected. As the humans stepped back, panting and exhausted, they didn't show any signs of defeat. They were bruised, battered, but they stood tall, proud of what they had accomplished. Korath approached Jake, who was wiping blood from his lip. "You fought well, human, but you cannot win against us in combat." Jake looked up at Korath, his expression unshaken. "We don't need to win. We just need to survive." Korath stared at him for a long moment. "You are unlike any species I have ever seen. You fight with a strength that cannot be measured by technology or power." Jake shrugged, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That's how we live. It's not about winning or losing. It's about pushing through, surviving. That's what we do." And in that moment, Korath knew that the humans were not to be underestimated. They were a force of nature, something that couldn't be conquered by technology or strength alone. They were survivors, and that made them more dangerous than anything the Zorath had ever faced. The sun had barely risen the next morning when the Zorath warriors gathered at the edge of the human settlement. The air was cool, and the light from the twin suns created a soft glow over the world. But the warriors, who had been so confident only days before, now stood uneasy. Korath, the commander, was quiet. His mind was filled with thoughts of the battle the previous day, where the humans had fought with everything they had, unrelenting, fearless, and full of will. It wasn't just their strength that had impressed him. It was the way they survived, the way they adapted to every challenge. The Zorath had underestimated them. They thought this world would be easy to conquer, but they were wrong. "They are different," Jean said, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't know how to explain it, but they're different from any species we've encountered." Korath nodded, his eyes focused on the humans. They were already busy with their morning routines, working, gathering supplies, preparing for the day ahead. There was no fear in their eyes, no sign of worry. They were simply living as they always did. "They're not like us," Korath muttered. "They have no advanced technology, no weapons that can match ours, but they survive." Jean didn't answer, but his gaze flickered over to Jake, who was helping a group of humans prepare for something. The alien warriors had seen him fight. They had seen him endure. And now they could only wonder what else the humans were capable of. Korath had made a decision. The humans had shown they were strong, but now he needed to see how they would respond to a true test. They had faced the Zorath warriors before, but that had been a test of strength and combat. Now the test would be different. The Zorath warriors had seen what the humans could do when it came to physical endurance, but what would they do when faced with a true threat? A danger that required more than just survival. A threat that would force them to make impossible choices. Korath turned to Jean. "We will challenge them in a way they won't expect." We'll give them a real test. Jean raised an eyebrow. What kind of test? Korath's eyes glinted with determination. A test of their survival skills. We will create a situation they cannot escape. A true reckoning. Jean nodded, understanding now. The Zorath would force the humans to face a situation where they had no choice but to adapt or perish. Hours later, the humans were gathered in the clearing near their settlement, just as they had been for their previous challenges. But today was different. Korath and his warriors had set up something far more dangerous, something that would test every bit of the humans' resolve. A massive drone, a machine built for destruction, stood at the far edge of the clearing. It was a mechanical beast, with armored plating, heavy weapons, and sensors that could detect even the smallest movement. The Zorath had sent it to the human settlement to see how the humans would respond. Would they fight? Would they run? Or would they face it knowing the odds were against them? The drone was not meant to kill, not yet. But its purpose was to overwhelm the humans, to put them in a situation where they would be forced to make a choice to fight or to flee. Korath stepped forward, watching the humans gather. They had no idea what was coming. And that was exactly the way Korath wanted it. They needed to face this challenge unprepared, so they could see how they would react under pressure. Jake and the others were unaware of the danger that awaited them. They looked at each other, joking and laughing, still unaware of the looming threat. Then, without warning, the drone's engines roared to life. The sound filled the air, sending a ripple of tension through the crowd of humans. "What is that?" someone asked, their voice trembling slightly. Jake turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the massive machine. He had never seen anything like it before. The drone stood tall, its weapons glowing ominously. "This isn't good," Jake muttered. He stepped forward, scanning the area. "Everyone get ready, it's not going to wait for us to figure out what's happening." The Zorath warriors watched intently, waiting for the humans to react. Would they panic? Would they try to flee? Or would they stand their ground, as they had done before? The drone's guns powered up, and without a second thought, it fired. The blast hit the ground near the humans, sending dirt and rocks flying. The humans jumped back in shock, but Jake didn't hesitate. He ordered them to stay calm. "Stay together," Jake shouted, his voice carrying over the noise. "We move as one. Don't scatter. We survive by sticking together." The humans followed his lead, moving quickly, but with purpose. Jake led them into the trees, using the terrain to their advantage. The drone fired again, this time hitting a nearby tree. The explosion sent branches and debris crashing to the ground. But the humans didn't stop. They didn't break formation. They continued to move, using the trees as cover. Korath watched in awe as the humans worked together. They weren't running, they weren't panicking, they were adapting. They were thinking, acting as one. The Zorath warriors had expected the humans to collapse under pressure, to scatter and flee like most lesser species would. But they didn't. They were showing a kind of resolve that Korath had never seen before. Jake's team reached a clearing, where they stopped to regroup. The drone was still firing, but the humans had found a way to counter it. They were using their environment, trapping the drone in a maze of trees and brush, forcing it to take slower, less accurate shots. It wasn't perfect. The drone was still a powerful machine, and its blasts continued to shake the earth beneath them. But the humans weren't afraid. They were relentless, finding new ways to challenge the machine, to use it against itself. Finally, after what felt like hours, the drone began to slow. It had been caught in the human-made trap, its movement restricted by the environment. It was no longer firing at random. It was stuck. Jake stood at the center of the clearing, breathing heavily but with a grin on his face. "We did it," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Korath stepped forward, his voice filled with respect. "You didn't just survive. You outsmarted it. You adapted." Jake nodded, still catching his breath. "It's what we do. We survive." Korath looked around at his warriors. They had witnessed the human strength, their endurance, their will to survive. But today they had seen something even more impressive. The humans had proven that they were not just survivors. They were problem solvers. They could face impossible odds and find a way to overcome them. And that was something the Zorath had never expected. The sun set slowly behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the human settlement. The once bright sky now tinged with deep reds and oranges. The Zorath warriors stood in silence, watching as the humans went about their evening routines. But there was a different air to this evening. The warriors had seen enough. They had seen more than they had ever expected from a species they had once thought primitive. Korath stood at the front of his warriors, his arms crossed, his eyes focused on the humans. It had been several days since they had first arrived. On this planet and in that time, the Zorath had witnessed more than they could have ever imagined. The humans had faced challenges, dangers, and battles, but they had not backed down. They had shown strength, courage, and intelligence that none of the Zorath had expected. And now, Korath knew the truth. These humans were not to be underestimated. They were not the weak, primitive creatures they had assumed. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Commander?" John spoke softly from behind him, his voice filled with respect. "What now? We have seen their strength, their will. But what does this mean for us? For them?" Korath turned to face John, his eyes hard but thoughtful. "It means we cannot simply take this world. We cannot simply conquer them as we have done with other species. These humans are different." John nodded, understanding. The Zorath had conquered worlds before, using their superior technology and strength, but they had never faced a species like this. The humans had no advanced weaponry, no powerful shields, no fleets of warships. They had only their bodies, their minds, and their will. And that was more than enough. Korath's voice was filled with a new sense of awe. They fight for survival, not for power. Their strength comes from within. It comes from their ability to adapt, to overcome, to push through every obstacle in their path. They are not like us. And that makes them dangerous. John's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous? You think they are a threat?" "I don't know," Korath said slowly. "But I do know one thing. If we underestimate them again, we will be making a mistake. These humans may not have the weapons we do, but they have something more. They have a will to survive that cannot be broken." John was silent for a long moment, his thoughts racing. The Zorath had seen many species, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, but none had shown the same kind of resilience, the same kind of relentless will to survive. He looked back at the humans who were still working together, sharing food, talking, and laughing. They had faced so many dangers, so many challenges, and they had never faltered. "It's like they thrive on adversity," John said finally. Korath's eyes shifted back to the humans. "Yes, they don't just survive adversity. They embrace it. They grow stronger because of it." The commander's thoughts turned inward. What would this mean for the future of humanity? What would it mean for the Zorath? Could they coexist with a species so different, so unpredictable, or would they one day find themselves facing the humans as enemies rather than allies? "I believe we have made a mistake," Korath said quietly. "We came here with the assumption that these humans were weak, that they could be easily controlled, but I see now that we were wrong. We must decide what we will do with this world. With them." John spoke again, his voice hesitant. "Do you think we should leave? Return to our own worlds and let them be?" Korath shook his head. "I don't. No. But we can't just walk away. Not now. Not after everything we've seen." The Zorath warriors stood in silence, contemplating the decision that lay before them. The humans had proven themselves, not just with their strength, but with their unity. They had shown that even without advanced technology, they could adapt, survive, and even thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. They had outlasted the challenges set before them, outsmarted the tests they were given, and stood strong against every danger. "They are like no species we have ever encountered," Korath said, his voice firm. "We will not destroy them. We will not conquer them, but we will learn from them. Sean glanced at the human settlement once more. What do we learn from them, Commander? Korath turned back to his warriors, his eyes serious. We learn what it truly means to survive. We learn the power of the human spirit, the strength of will. And perhaps, we learn that strength isn't always about power or technology. Sometimes, it's about how much you are willing to fight for what you believe in. The Zorath commander turned and began to walk away, his warriors following in silence. They had come to this world with one purpose: to conquer, to rule. But now, they were leaving with a new understanding of what it meant to be strong. And that was something they had never expected to find in a world like this. As they moved away, the humans continued with their lives. They didn't know that the Zorath had been watching them, studying them. They didn't know that their simple acts of survival had left a lasting impression on the warriors who had once considered them weak. The humans didn't need to know. Their strength wasn't in their knowledge of the Zorath. It was in the way they lived, the way they fought for survival, and the way they never stopped. Korath glanced back one last time before stepping into the shadows of the forest. His mind was made up. The humans were not to be underestimated, and their future was something that the Zorath would have to reckon with. And as the Zorath warriors disappeared into the distance, the humans went on living, unaware that their very existence had changed the fate of an entire species. They were just surviving. But for the first time, it was enough to change the universe.